Well, hey there, church. Good morning. Can we just give it up again for Shaq and the worship team there this morning? Can I just tell you how blessed we are at Illuminate here, just to have a staff team who will literally serve in whatever way. Like Shaq didn't get hired to lead worship, but John's on vacation this Sunday. I'm preaching, and so he just steps in and steps up there. Right? Other members of our team, we just kind of step up and get the job done because we understand that the goal is growing the kingdom, not defining roles. And so I hear them from backstage there. Right, so good morning, church. If you don't know me, my name is Dan. I'm just one of the pastors here at Illuminate. And today we're going to be continuing our series on David. But first, I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you about one of the greatest tests of patience that I have ever experienced in my life. Costco. You see, I made the mistake of one time a few years ago of going to Costco on a Saturday afternoon at like peak time, and some of you are moaning because you already know. You see, Saturday at Costco is like part Hunger Games, part family reunion, and part cart dodging Olympics. But the real draw is this: free samples. Right? The little stations tucked between the frozen food and like the oversized containers of cashews that nobody needs. That's what you're really there for. And so on that day, I spotted a sample table serving golden, crispy, hot dinosaur chicken nuggets. And here's the thing, I made the mistake of going to Costco when I was hungry, of not eating lunch before I went in, and so I was starving. And I saw these nuggets, and I thought to myself, this is divine. It is like manna from heaven. Not really. I don't really talk that way in real life, but some dramatic effect always makes for a better story. So I walked up, tray in sight, my belly's growling. I'm ready to receive the blessing from God, and the woman at the table smiles at me, and she says, they'll be ready in just 2 minutes, sir. And I think, no problem, I can wait 2 minutes. But 2 minutes turned to 5, and then 5 turned to 7. And suddenly there's this small crowd that is forming, all of us hovering nearby, kind of pretending to look at the frozen lasagnas, but like, we're all here for the same thing. We're committed to the cause. We've invested too much to walk away now. And so finally the timer dings, the nuggets are ready, and the tray of these little dinosaurs comes out of the toaster oven like a procession of glory. And then just as I reach forward to grab one, a lady 2 carts over zips in, cuts the line, scoops up 3 nuggets, and hands them out to their kids, and just like that, they're gone. Empty tray, no more nuggies. I had waited, I had hoped, I had hungered, and I walked away with nothing but a tiny little napkin and some crushed dreams. You see, waiting is hard. It's even harder when you're hungry or when you're tired or when you're disappointed. And the truth is, waiting doesn't just test our patience, it tests our trust. Because when we wait, we're forced to wrestle with a question, and it's, do I believe that what I'm waiting for is really worth the wait? Or do I trust that the one who told me to wait is actually going to come and show up? We live in a culture, I think, that is allergic to waiting. We just want things done quickly. We expect them instantly. I mean, high-speed internet, 2-day shipping, instant messages, tap to pay. Everything in our lives is engineered to minimize our delay. And I think sometimes we carry that same expectation into our relationship with God. We want him to speak clearly. We want him to move quickly. We want him to open doors immediately and fix problems instantly. But the reality of our faith is that God rarely works on our timetable. The Bible is full of stories of people who had to wait. Abraham waited decades for a son. Joseph waited years in slavery and in prison. Israel waited generations for the Messiah. And David, the young shepherd boy who was anointed to be king, spent years running for his life, waiting for God to fulfill his promise. You see, waiting is not just a delay, it's a refining fire. It purifies, it motivates, it strengthens our character. It forces us to rely on God more than on ourselves. And so here's what I want to say. I just want to echo some of the themes we talked about in week 1 of this series when we talked about trusting in God. I want to say this, that if you feel like you are in a waiting season right now, you're not alone. If you're in a waiting season right now, you're not off track. Waiting is often God's preparation for something greater. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to explore one of David's most famous waiting moments. It happens in 1 Samuel 24. It's a moment that tested David's heart. It's a moment that revealed David's character and ultimately demonstrated what it looks like to wait on God with trust and obedience. But before we dive into the text, I want to give you some background here so we know what's going on in the story up until this point. So David has been anointed by God to be king, but he hadn't yet been appointed by God and given the crown. And so he trusts and he waits. Along the way, he obeys God with a heart of courage, and he goes on and he defeats Goliath. And then he goes on to be the most successful military commander in Israel. He's the people's favorites, and yet he's still deeply a servant of Saul. But Saul's jealousy begins to overtake his judgment. After David killed Goliath and began serving in Saul's army, his victories on the battlefield won him the hearts of the people. And in 1 Samuel 18, the women sing this song. They say, Saul has defeated thousands, but David tens of thousands. And that one line, it forms a fire of insecurity in Saul. From that moment on, Saul viewed David not just as a loyal warrior, but as a threat to his throne. And so Saul's jealousy turns into paranoia. He tries to manipulate David with marriage alliances. He throws spears at him in the palace. He plots ways to have David killed in battle. And when all of that fails, he outright pursues David with the entire army of Israel. By the time we get to 1 Samuel 24, David's a fugitive. Not because of rebellion, not because of sin, but because of Saul's fear and paranoia. Saul has now assembled 3,000 of Israel's best military soldiers to track down one man. That's the level of obsession he's operating at. Saul is spiraling, and David's caught in the crossfire. It's this emotional, spiritual, and political climate that we find the story of the cave. A moment where everything could change in an instant. A moment where David's tempted to act, but chooses instead to wait on God. And we read there in 1 Samuel 24 that after Saul returned from fighting the Philistines, he was told that David had gone into the wilderness of En-Gedi. So Saul chose 3,000 elite troops from all of Israel and went to search for David and his men near the rocks of the wild goats, at the place where the road passes some sheepfolds. Saul went into a cave to relieve himself. But as it happened, David and his men were hiding further back in that very cave. Now's your opportunity, David's men whispered to him. Today the Lord is telling you, I will certainly put your enemy into your power to do with as you wish. So David crept forward, and he cut off a piece of the hem of Saul's robe. But then David's conscience began bothering him because he had cut Saul's robe. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this to my lord the king. I shouldn't attack the Lord's anointed one, for the Lord himself has chosen him. So David restrained his men and did not let them kill Saul. Here's the thing. When we look at this, David has done everything right. He honored God. He obeyed his call. He served Saul faithfully. He fought Goliath. He led troops into battle. He played music to calm Saul's torment. He remained loyal to Saul even when he had been treated unjustly. And yet instead of sitting on a throne, he finds himself sitting in the back of a dark, damp cave with a bounty on his head. He's surrounded by soldiers, not as their commander, but but as fugitives. Instead of celebrating, he's hiding. Instead of the palace, he's in the wilderness. And this moment in the cave could have easily felt like a contradiction to God's promise. Can you imagine what David must have been thinking? God, didn't you anoint me to be king? Didn't the prophet Samuel pour oil on my head? Why am I running for my life? Why does everything in my life seem to be going backward instead of forward? Have you ever felt like that? Maybe you've obeyed God. You said yes to what he called you to do. You stepped out in faith. You chose the high road. You sacrificed. You forgave. You served. And now you're in a metaphorical cave. Confused, discouraged, and wondering if God even sees you. That's exactly where David is. But here's what we have to understand. The cave is not a dead end. The cave is a classroom. The cave feels like the place where everything stops, but it's actually where something deeper starts. In the cave, God is shaping David's identity. He's forging his character. He's preparing him to be the king, the kind of king who would lead not out of ego or insecurity like Saul, but out of a deep reliance on God. It's in this cave, in this season where David's a fugitive, that he writes Psalm 57. He doesn't just survive the waiting, he worships in the waiting. In the cave, David writes these words. He says, I cry out to God Most High, to God who will fulfill his purpose for me. My heart is steadfast. Oh God, my heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. They're the words that David writes in the cave in this season of waiting while he's on the run. That's not the cry of someone who's given up. That's the cry of someone who is choosing trust. That God will fulfill his purpose for me even though I can't see it yet. What a powerful declaration that is. That even when the promise feels far off, David reminds himself that God's going to do it. In his time and his way, God will do it. Now picture the scene. David and his men are deep in the cave. They're hiding from Saul and his army of 3,000 elite soldiers. And suddenly they hear footsteps echo off the cave walls. A figure steps inside, and it's Saul, the man who's been hunting them. He doesn't know they're there. He's not actually there to fight. The Bible says he's there to relieve himself. You know what that means? He had to go to the bathroom. It means he had to pee. And so he's there, vulnerable, alone, unprotected, exposed, probably literally. And David's men see it immediately. And they say, this is it. This is the moment that God has promised you. He's delivered Saul right into your hands. Strike him down, take the throne, end the running. And they're not just excited, they're convinced that this is divine providence, and how can we blame them? It looks like a perfect setup. The king who has hunted David for months is right there. One move and it's over. Justice, revenge, victory. But David doesn't raise his sword. Instead, he creeps forward and he quietly cuts off a corner of Saul's robe, and then his conscience strikes. Even just cutting the robe of the king makes his heart ache. And he turns to his men and says, the Lord forbid that I should do this to my master, the Lord's anointed. I shouldn't attack the Lord's anointed one, for the Lord himself has chosen him. And I think this is the heart of the whole passage that we're talking about this morning. David realizes something crucial. That just because the opportunity presents itself doesn't mean it's from God. Just because the opportunity presents itself doesn't mean it's from God. This moment wasn't a divine invitation to seize power. It was a divine test to see if David would trust in God's timing, or he would let his own ambition take over. Let that sink in, that God at times tests our hearts by giving us a chance to shortcut his process. To take something now that he promised he would give us later if we wait. Sometimes what looks like a blessing is actually a test, and if we fail to see it, what we take isn't ours. What we'll do is we'll take it and we'll walk away without God's blessing in our future. You see, David's men, they only see the opportunity, but David sees the test. And instead of grabbing what looked like his, but it wasn't yet, he lets it go. And so what we see here is the heart of God shaping him. It's the lesson from the classroom of the cave. You see, David's men were so eager. They were so eager for change. They were so desperate for relief that they immediately interpreted the situation through a spiritual lens. They said, "The Lord is telling you. He delivered your enemy into your hands," but here's the problem. God never said that. There's no record of God giving that word. What these men were doing is they were projecting their own desires onto God's voice. They wanted the waiting to be over, so they made the moment fit their hope. They confused convenience for calling. Have you ever met somebody like that who speaks in those ways? Well, God told me this, or God's telling me that. This can be such a danger for us too. Church, we can so often easily over-spiritualize moments when we're tired of waiting. We can convince ourselves that a door opening means God opened it for us. That a shortcut must be a divine gift. That pressure means permission. But a heart after God learns to discern between God's voice and our own desires just dressed up in spiritual language. Here's the truth. Not every door is God's will. Not every opportunity is God's timing. Not every spiritual voice in your life is actually speaking truth. This is why we need to stay close to God in the waiting, so we can know his heart. We use that language here all the time at Illuminate to chase after the heart of God in our lives. You see, David had to quiet the voices around him so that he could listen for the whisper of God. And in that silence, he hears what others missed. Don't take what isn't yours. Don't kill the king. Trust me. It's not that David didn't have reason to take revenge against Saul. The man who had pushed him to the margins, the man who had made him an outcast, the man who had hunted him like an animal. And yet David refused, not because Saul deserved mercy, but because David feared God more than he trusted his own anger. This is the heart of somebody after God. Not driven by revenge, not led by entitlement, not motivated by opportunity, but anchored in trust and shaped in restraint. You see, David could have ended his suffering. He could have taken the crown. He could have proven everyone wrong, but he knew this truth that how you get there matters just as much as getting there. It's one thing to receive a promise from God. It's another thing to reach out for it and take it before God says it's time. The danger isn't just in where you're going, it's in how you arrive. And here's the thing, as I was writing this week, what really stood out to me as I wrestled with this passage was this. So if you're taking notes, make sure you write this down. Because I think that in his wisdom, David in the cave knew that the truth was this, that shortcuts always cost more than you expect. Shortcuts always cost more than you expect. I mean, think about it for a minute. Taking a shortcut always feels like a win in the moment. It's less time, it's less effort, it's immediate results. But in spiritual terms, shortcuts almost always cost us more than we can see. A shortcut in your integrity might get you a promotion, but at the cost of your peace. A shortcut in your relationship might give you company, but keep you from your covenant. A shortcut in your calling might get you attention, but attention is not anointing. And maybe most dangerously, a shortcut might get you to the destination, but it could rob you of the strength of character that you were supposed to develop along the way. Let's talk about something we've all seen, right? Those viral overnight success stories. Someone blows up on social media and they get 1 billion followers in like 3 weeks. And it leads to endorsement deals and speaking gigs, and they get flooded with influence, attention, and opportunity. But what happens usually? Often without the foundation, without the character to sustain it, it just all crumbles. We've seen it over and over again that people who get thrust into the spotlight before they've developed lack the roots to hold the weight. And what looks like a blessing soon becomes a burden. It collapses, not because they weren't talented, but because they weren't ready. That's what spiritual shortcuts do. They hand you influence without integrity. They put you on a platform that your soul can't support. David didn't want to be an overnight success. He didn't want the crown without the character. He didn't want the position. He wanted the presence of God with him in the position. He wanted to arrive in the right way with a clean conscience and a faithful heart, and so he waited, even when it hurt, even when others didn't understand, even when the opportunity was right in front of him. Here's what happens next. Saul exits the cave, unaware of how close he came to death, and David steps out. And I think this is probably one of the most emotionally powerful moments in David's story. David doesn't gloat, he doesn't threaten, he doesn't even celebrate his restraint. Instead, he just humbly reveals himself and says, "This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord because he's the Lord's anointed. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you've done to me, but my hand will not touch you." David doesn't just try to justify himself. He doesn't take matters into his own hands. He entrusts justice to God. And what happens next is extraordinary. The same man who had been obsessed with killing David, Saul, he breaks down, he weeps, he says, "You are more righteous than I. You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands." Just think about that for a minute. God didn't just protect David. He uses David's restraint to confirm the promise straight through the lips of his enemy. You see, David didn't have to demand validation. He didn't have to force the timing. He didn't have to prove anything. His obedience did the talking. His patience made the path clear. And so if you've heard nothing else today, please hear this, that God is not just with you in the waiting, that God is working for you in the waiting. Even when you can't see it, even when the cave feels like a dead end, even when your prayers feel like they're going unanswered, when your progress feels invisible, when your heart feels heavy. You see, David doesn't see it at the time, but every day he spent in the wilderness, every night he spent in the cave, every moment of confusion or temptation, God was building something. He was preparing a throne, yes, but even more than that, he was preparing a heart. And so when the time is right, when David trusts in God, when he waits, when he restrains himself, God confirms the promise that he had given to David straight through the lips of his enemy. Where Saul, this man who is hunting David, says, "I understand now. You're going to be king." You see, some of you are in a cave right now. Not literally, but emotionally, spiritually, relationally. You've been waiting. You've been hoping. You've been praying. You've been staying faithful. You've been wondering if God still remembers what he promised. And so as we close, let me encourage you. You're not forgotten. You're not stuck. You're not off course. You're being formed. God is doing more in your waiting than you could ever imagine. He's working things together. He's opening doors that you haven't even seen yet. He's protecting things, or protecting you from things that you don't even know you're being spared from. And so hold on. Don't take the shortcut. Don't lose heart. Keep trusting, keep worshiping, keep waiting, because God is for you. And if God is for you, who can be against you? I think one of the most powerful reminders of this we have in the church, that God is always for us, is the act of communion. And so instead of simply praying at the end of the message, what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite Pastor Craig up and take part in communion together this morning. Pastor Craig, would you come up and lead us?